Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March meeting of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, the Ottawa Centre. My name is Mike Moda, and it's a real privilege to be your guide tonight. I have the honor of introducing some really interesting speakers, and I have to tell you, I'm just absolutely thoroughly excited about tonight. Tonight is the culmination of many months of planning. I've been talking to one of our speakers, Sarah Simmons, for a number of months, exchanging emails. It's been a pleasure doing that, by the way, Sarah. And she has a wonderful presentation. She's delivering a presentation on ancient Egyptian astronomy. I've seen her presentation, as I've said in some emails to you. It's as good as it gets. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. After Sarah's presentation, we're going to have I'm jumping ahead here. After my introduction, Gary's going to talk about the Ottawa skies. It's his regular segment that he does on what to expect in the March sky, and followed by Sarah. We're going to have a break at that time, and then after the break, we have our observations, and we also have a mystery guest that will surprise many of you. Okay, I think so. I'm quite excited about that mystery guest, as you'll see. Simon Hammer, we all know him. Okay, as we're privileged to have him as our Ottawa Centre member. His enthusiasm, well, it's tangible. Okay, and him and Mike Wirfs are together delivering a presentation that is something else. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. We got a lot of announcements, and that I want to talk as far as astronomy events, and that I think are of interest to you. And we also have a ton of door prizes. And I hope you have picked up your door prizes as you entered. If you door prize tickets when you entered, because everyone is no need to be an RASC member to be eligible for door prize. We got some really neat door prizes here, as you'll see. One of them is a signed copy of Chris Hatsfield's Astronomer's Guide to Life, courtesy of the Canadian Space Society, who are kind enough to come here and with their booth, the Ottawa chapter. So that's one of the many door prizes we have tonight. We're going to give away the door prizes right at the end of the meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think it's. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to mention as well that it's worth pointing out to you that this meeting is broadcast live over the internet. And if you wish to watch this broadcast, it'll be posted 10 minutes after the meeting. So if you missed something or you want to hear something again, it's on the meeting. I'll be talking about where you can see that email address. All that, by the way, this recording and the internet broadcasting is courtesy of Eric Kajula, who labors away, and I think he's a pillar of our club. And Eric, we're truly grateful to you for what you do. Eric is constantly innovating. He's constantly innovating, and he never seeks any praise. And he quietly sits and he labors away. And Eric, you're amazing. Okay, so I bet many of you are here for the first time tonight. We widely promoted this meeting here, and you may be wondering who the RASC is and what it has to offer. Since you're a captive audience now, I thought I might take steal 2 minutes of your time and introduce the RASC. So, founded in 1868, the Royal Astronomical Society, thank you, of Canada is Canada's leading astronomy organization. It has over 4,200 members that include enthusiastic amateurs, educators, and professionals. The Ottawa Centre is one of 29 centres across the country. And our mission. What do we do? What's our mission? What's our reason? Our purpose? It's to advance your understanding, the public's understanding of astronomy through education, through outreach, and through a variety of programs and publications. So you'll hear about these activities tonight, and I hope you actually participate in some of them in the coming months, and for sure. Our objective is to inspire curiosity about and promote a personal appreciation of the beauty of the universe through observation and really collaboration through this club here. So we love sharing our interest in the night sky, and I think it sort of speaks to there's a certain tranquil beauty of the night sky. And I know sometimes when you're out there in a dark spot and it's completely dark all around you, there's almost something about the night sky, the dark night spot, being larger than any of us. All right, so something you'll appreciate when it's quiet, a little cold maybe, but that's all good. So our organization, as I said, is largely a group of amateur astronomers. Peppered amongst us is our academics, people who are directly or peripherally related or involved with astronomy or any of the allied sciences, okay, in some capacity. Regardless of who you are, we love to talk about astronomy, okay, and that's what the RASC is all about. Most of you probably know about the RASC through our public star parties that we have over the course of the summer and the autumn time. In these events, we set up our telescopes. Our members set up telescopes and share views of the night sky with you. Something I wanted to say quickly about our organization, the Ottawa Centre, is we have some, and you'll see, by the way, a slide at break time which explains all about what we have to offer. But some of the unique things we have to offer is we have an observatory that is available to members. We have a telescope library where you can sign out like books, telescopes. We have an extensive library here as well, right around the corner. You'll see it. You're welcome to go take a look at it and see it. It's really something. We have school and outreach programs that I know there's a number of teachers here tonight. We can come to your school. We can give presentations. We can even do solar observing at noontime to sort of meet the schedules of students and yourself. We also attend public events such as the Cube Gallery's annual Nocturne event. That is run by Don Monet, who's here in the audience tonight. Wonderful event. We set up telescopes. Don brings in speakers. It's as good as it gets in July. Wonderful evening. He arranges for lights to be turned off on one of the neighboring streets. It's terrific. And we're also participating in the National Science and Technology Week Science Fun Fest is really a premier event. We love doing that. Okay, so let me close. These meetings that you're participating in, they occur every month. So great that you came this month. You're welcome to come next month. They're always free, and they're typically held on the first Friday of every month. So. That was it for the RAC. Let's go to the next slide. So as always, what we like to do here is we like to welcome new members. So Robert Ashton, if you're here tonight, or Aston and Owen Crawford, can you say something? Okay. Whenever I've done this in the past, the people come up to me afterwards and say I was here. So okay, I'm sure you're here. Okay, welcome. It's worth pointing out that since January we've had January 1 we had 14 new members this year. So awesome. Okay, we also like to have talk about members in the news. This one here is from Mike Wirf, so you'll hear more than once tonight. Mike is an interesting fellow. He's moved to the Baja Peninsula. He's remained an Ottawa Centre a member, and he's a very active one, in fact. And he's well known for many things. His lunar astrophotography is I can almost hesitate to say. I'm almost confident saying second to none. This is second to no one, anyone else. Here he has an image of Sinus Iridium. Okay, that's Latin for the a bay of rainbows. It appeared in the this March. This is the March picture of the the RASC's calendar. The Sinus Iridium, for those who don't know, is formed from the remains of a large impact crater that was subsequently flooded with basaltic lava. Now, Mare Imbrium. I should use that laser pointer here. Which one, Chris? Mare Imbrium is down here. It itself is a vast basaltic plain here. Crater Bianchini is at the top here, and it's part of the Montes Jura range. And the Laplace A crater, well defined here, followed by the Helicon crater. Now that's a very interesting shape of that crater, but we'll come to that later. Mike is an amazing fellow. You'll see some more of his work later on. But well done, Mike. Okay, next slide, please. Next up is Gary Boyle. Gary is the president of our club, and he every month he gives a talk on the what to expect in the March night sky. He's also very prominent nationally for the RASC nationally, and his segment also appears in our at the RASC national site. So Gary, over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome all. And no, I do not wear the suit every month. I did just for you people. Can I have the lights up for 1 second, please? I'd just like to see a show of hands. Our first-time visitors here at the museum. Once the lights are up. Great. Excellent. Excellent. Welcome all. Welcome. And also, who are our members, RASC members here? Well, these are our ambassadors. If you have any questions about the Ottawa Centre or in astronomy, please see one of these people that held up their hands. Okay? And of course, welcome people around the internet, including I know Roman from Australia is watching now, having breakfast as we watch. So without further ado, let's start with the first slide. Well, I'm sure many of you have recognized Orion the Hunter, the prominent classic winter constellation. It's my first telescope that I named. A lot of amateurs named their telescopes, and I named this one Orion. I built in 1977. And what it is really is the sky is made up of a lot of mythology. And there were a lot of stories when people saw these shapes put together, either animals or people or objects or even gods. So here we have the two shoulders of Orion's belt, his two knees, the never have the paths cross. Remember Egon from Ghostbusters? Never have the paths cross. So here we have the shoulder, the sword, and the club battling towards the bull. And even just the sheer, no, not yet, if you go back, and just the sheer distances of stars. Here we have 8.6 light years, whereas the star in the middle is about 2,000 light years away. And this is about 800. So really you're looking at stars not like wallpaper on the ceiling, but really 3D. So next slide, we'll see one close-up object. If we take Sirius, the dog star, which is the eye of the dog, and come down here, we have a beautiful open cluster of stars. Its catalog number is M41. And it's about 2,300 light years away. This is the brightness that we give to objects, just like you give brightnesses of lamps, of light bulbs. We can see down to about 6 magnitude. Anything brighter than that into negatives get really, really bright. The moon is negative 12. The sun's minus 26. So here's a beautiful open cluster to look at tonight if you have binoculars, telescope. Even naked eye if you're away from city lights. Okay, next slide, please. So here we have planets, and true Jupiter was in the first slide. I'll come back to that in a minute. We have number 2 and number 3 planets, which you can see visually with your eye. Of course, the telescope always helps. So Mars rises around 10 p.m. tonight, along with the star Spica, and Saturn around midnight. So you can see planets during the night. In fact, if you go back to the first slide, I failed to show Jupiter. Jupiter's up here amongst the Gemini twins. Very, very bright star. So the five wandering planets, the sun and the moon, gives us our 7 days of the week. Sunday for day of the sun, Monday for day of the moon, Tuesday for French from Mars for Mercredi, Mars from Mardi for Mars, Mercredi for Wednesday, Jeudi for Jupiter, Vendredi for Venus, and Saturn for Saturday. Okay, continuing our tour.
Here.
Yep.
Use my pointer.
Your pointer? Okay.
The green one.
In the middle?
In the middle.
Middle?
And then the top.
Uh-oh. Oh, now what did I do? I do that every month. Believe me, you'll enjoy this. Okay, sweet. Okay, so we have Mars and we have Saturn. So these are the second and third planets rising. Arcturus, another prominent star up here. So a lot of these stars you can pretty well see on a clear night with the moon not out, because the moon does cover the sky. Being in the city, you're down to about maybe 20 stars. And of course, at 3 o'clock in the morning now, we're seeing the summer Milky Way starting to rise with the Scorpius, constellation of Scorpius. So some of the summer stuff is coming up here. In fact, in the mornings, I even see Cygnus of Swan when my wife and I leave at 6 o'clock in the morning. So the sky changes 4 minutes each day, so that's why we get constellations slowly sinking and new ones slowly rising. Okay, next slide, because I'm going to screw it up. Put your clocks ahead this Saturday night going to bed at 2 a.m. 2 a.m. Sunday morning, spring ahead, fall back. Now we're actually going to lose 1 hour of sleep, but also losing an hour of astronomy, unless you stay up all night like some people do on weekends. And I have down the bottom now we subtract 4 hours from universal time. Well, universal time is the old Greenwich Mean Time that they have in England, because in our handbook and anywhere pretty well, astronomers use UT for various celestial events, say for eclipses or when the moons of Jupiter disappear behind the planet or shadow, something like that. Well, if you said it was 4 p.m., is it in Africa, is it in Ottawa, is it in Vancouver? So it's UT, which is in England, and now to convert to Ottawa time, we subtract 4 hours rather than the 5 that we had before the time change. And depending where you are in the world, you just convert, either add or subtract hours. Okay, next slide. Well, the grandest of events will happen this month on the morning of the 20th, March 20th at 6:08 UT, as I just mentioned, and we subtract 4 hours, brings it 2:08 in the morning here in Ottawa. What will occur is we do have an asteroid, which is 163 Aragon, that will pass in front of a very bright star, Regulus. It's very simple to find Regulus in the constellation of Leo, which is a backwards question mark along with a nice triangle. It's actually below the Big Dipper. So the Big Dipper's right here, so if you put a pot or put a hole in the pot of the Big Dipper, it'll actually sink onto the back of Leo the Lion. And this main star will actually wink out or disappear for 14 seconds. The star does not disappear, but Aragon is actually 44 kilometers wide. Large asteroid. It will not hit us. It'll be a mere 160 million kilometers from Earth. Really close, really close. But with its size, it will pass, so it'll block the star for that amount of time. The only thing is that you must be on a very specific path on Earth. And this is where you actually go through Kingston, little west of Kingston, up through Algonquin Park and down to New York State. So living in Ottawa, it's not a very far distance. Of course, if you're in Vancouver, you'd have to fly all the way here to see it. The great thing is that usually asteroids do pass in front of very dim stars. But this is an extremely bright star that we can see naked eye on a clear night. And to see it over a well-populated area, that's the great part about it. And I'm sure some spectrometry will be done on these observations too. But just the beauty of it, just like a solar eclipse, to see these things really happen, the rareness of the event. Okay, next slide, please. So yes, so the star itself is actually 1.3 magnitude, which is very bright. And the asteroid is 11.1. You do need binoculars or a telescope. You will not see it naked eye. Okay, next slide. Pretty well that same day, we have the spring equinox. Equinox meaning equal, so we'll have 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night, and after that you'll see the daytime hours will lengthen over time. Here we have equinox for equal time for spring and fall, as opposed to the solstice, where the sun is standing still, as the solstice really means, where it stands still in the winter and the summertime. So taking now spring, next slide please, you wonder, does anybody know when Easter is without looking at the map? Easter changes every year, right? Now how many people actually don't know or are wondering, why does that date ever change? Show of hands. What we do is we take the spring equinox, we come to the next full moon, which will be the pink moon, and this is Sunday right after. Oops, I did that. See what I mean? I did. So it's the full moon, the springtime, next full moon, next Sunday is Easter. That's why it changes every month. Okay, next slide. The International Space Station can be seen most mornings and most nights when it's clear. It's extremely bright. Here we're in the minuses now. Remember I said we can see down to about +6. When you're getting to the minuses, it's extremely bright. In fact, Venus is -4.4. So on the morning of the, what day was it? Oh, sorry, March 29th. It's a morning time object because it's really sunlight that reflects off its outer skin. It really doesn't have lights. So you'll see that it begins here in the west, coming by some pretty bright stars. Here we have the summer triangle of Deneb, Vega, and Altair, and goes right by Venus and disappears. So I'll keep that in mind if you've never seen a space station. In fact, if you go to my personal website, wondersofastronomy.com, I do have a link for Ottawa, and you can pretty well judge from there when to see the space station. And you can make some money on the site too. I'll say, I bet you $20, the space station's coming. Next slide, please. Not that you should bet. Don't bet. Gotta be over 18. And here's the moon if people follow their lunar phases, when the first quarter, full moon, last quarter, and the next lunation period, or the next new moon, and just distances. Because the moon does vary within about 50,000 kilometers of short and long distance from the Earth. Okay, next slide. And as As Mike has mentioned, I do write for the national site of the RASC. It's called The Sky This Month, and for March, I'm dealing actually with Hydra, the water serpent, the various objects in Hydra, a lot of links to objects, another great place to learn astronomy. Okay, next slide. So who remembers 20 years ago, Cosmos, September of, not that you want to date yourselves, this September of 1980. It was a 13-hour episode by the great Carl Sagan, who really popularized astronomy. I'm sure a lot of people here began their journey in astronomy thanks to him. Well, I remember back then, of course, we didn't have any way of recording it, and I would ask my wife to leave the room and be very quiet as I put the cassette right next to the TV, just to record these 13 hours. And now I can actually look it up on my cell phone. Well, beginning this Sunday, check your local listings. Neil deGrasse Tyson is bringing back Cosmos after 34 years. So it's a series. I'm not sure how many episodes there will be, but the first will be this Sunday. I think it's at 8 or 9 o'clock. Again, check your local listings. So it'll be neat to see the difference, if you can get on YouTube, between the old and the new. Okay, next slide. And I hope to see all of you. Well, I can't really physically see you now. It's too dark. But I hope many of you will come back, enjoy tonight, and we hope to see you again next month. Thanks for coming.
I'm really excited about the next speaker that we have tonight. My journey with Dr. Sarah Simmons started last fall, where I had heard that she had delivered a riveting presentation at the Ontario Science Centre. Was working with the Toronto RASC. I sent her an email. I said, would you be interested in coming possibly to Ottawa? And she responded so enthusiastically. I knew that we were on to something. It's been, as I said earlier, it's been a pleasure interacting with her through emails, and I'm sure you're going to be very impressed with her. Dr. Simmons is a member of the faculty of McMaster University in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. She is she's part of a design and instructional team for integrated science, which is a four-year undergraduate program. A four-year program combining all areas of science, and which is taught through research. And the program is only one of its kind in Canada. She brought the program design to Canada from the United Kingdom. She's also the director of the William J. McCallion Planetarium in Hamilton, which hosts a live presenter every week with a different topic. I have to say, I spent a wonderful afternoon with her, and I learned quite a few things. She reads hieroglyphics. And I was quite impressed. I was asking her questions about, is there a past and present and future tense and that? And she said yes, and she explained it to me. And then we walked around the Parliament buildings, went through the market and so forth. Then we drove by the War Museum, and I said, there's Morse code on the side of the building there, and I can't remember what it says. And
lest we forget.
She reads Morse code as well. Okay, so she said, lest we forget. So at that point, I started to feel really small. Okay. Now I mentioned this to her earlier, and she tried to make me feel better by saying, that Morse code is not as involved as hieroglyphics, but didn't help. I still felt small. I think I need to do some more homework. Her research area is the history of science, in particular tonight's subject, which is ancient Egyptian astronomy. I'm thrilled she's here. It's been something I've wanted to do for years. Please welcome Sarah Simmons.
Good evening, bonsoir. Thanks very much for the introduction, Mike. It's an absolute pleasure to be here to talk to you about the subject which I love, ancient Egyptian astronomy. Now, our topic today reaches back to the beginnings of humans writing in hieroglyphs about what we now call astronomy, the activity of describing what we see in the sky and building a place for that knowledge in amongst our cultural activities, our language, and our worldview. Ancient Egypt is a culture that we all know something about. It has perhaps the most recognizable brand image of any civilization. We also know that it had a reputation, even in earlier times. Classical authors seem to believe that it was a repository of wisdom, especially astronomical wisdom. But of course, those authors were writing towards the end of the ancient Egyptian civilization. And today we're going to look quite a bit earlier. We'll go back as far as around 2000 BC. And we'll look at two types of astronomical document. In the title, I've called them maps and tables. So let's start with maps. The nearest thing we have to star maps from ancient Egypt don't look much like our modern star maps. And neither do they occur in locations where we would expect to find star maps, observatories, universities, etc. Many of them are underground. Here, for example, we're in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and the ceiling is decorated with an astronomical diagram, a drawing depicting the objects that could be seen in the skies over ancient Egypt. The notion of stars appearing on the ceiling of temples and tombs comes from the idea that an Egyptian temple or tomb was a model of the universe. And of course, in a model universe, you'd expect to find the sky on the ceiling. The symbol that the Egyptians used for a star is a 5-pointed star, and it's one of the earliest known hieroglyphs. Its use goes back to at least 3000 BC. Now, in temples and tombs over Egypt, all over star patterns, plain repeating star patterns, such as the ones that you see on the left here, are quite common. And we can see them in a temple, and you might be able to make out in the black and white photograph on the right that this is a pyramid chamber. And the roof of the pyramid chamber, the ceiling, is covered in carved 5-pointed stars. So those are all over patterns. But what happens when the representation of the sky gets a little bit more detailed, and instead of just star symbols, we have representations of stars and planets? Well, here is an astronomical diagram, an ancient Egyptian star map. So this star map occurs in a tomb, not of a pharaoh, but of a commoner. Senenmut. His name was Senenmut. He's an interesting guy. He was an architect. He was advisor of a female pharaoh, a queen. And there's quite a lot of rumour in ancient Egypt that he was more than just her advisor. But however he did it, he got himself a really nice little tomb. And he used the ceiling of the tomb, he decorated it with an astronomical diagram. This is the earliest surviving one that we have. And it would be a really nice story if we thought that Senenmut himself, with all his various interests and talents, had designed this thing. But we know that earlier ones existed, they just haven't survived to the present. So this is the earliest one we have. It's divided into two halves, representing the north and south part of the sky. So let's take a closer look at each half of this diagram. Here we have the northern half. The northern half, the main feature that stands out immediately are the circles. These circles, there are 12 of them, they're labelled in hieroglyphs with the names of the lunar months. And all of these diagrams are slightly different, and this is the unique feature of Senenmut's diagram. He's the only one that has circles representing the lunar months. So we'll see one a bit later on which has the lunar months present but not circles. In the middle, we have a group of different characters. A hippo, crocodiles, pointy things, and right up at the top, a weird blobby shape that has horns, and I'll point that one out for you. That foreleg of an ox is meant to represent part of an animal, and the hippo and the crocodiles form a group of figures that we call the circumpolar group. They represent the stars that rotate around the north circumpolar, the north pole of the sky, the north celestial pole. And we see this group repeated again and again in astronomical diagrams. Always accompanying this group are two processions of deities. Now, the figures, the hippopotamus, the crocodiles, we can think of those as constellations, and that's fine. But who these deities are on either side, they always occur, they're always in the same order, they're named, they have individual characteristics. We just don't know who they were. Maybe originally they represented the days of the lunar month and they mistakenly got associated with the northern stars. We don't know. So that's the northern half of the ceiling. Let's move to the southern half. Here again, we have more figures and a bit more text that you can see in the southern half of the ceiling. We read in ancient Egyptian usually from right to left, and that's the case in this ceiling. So reading from right to left, the first half is a list of star names. We call these stars decans, and they're the calendrical or timekeeping stars of the Egyptian sky. And here's a whole list of them. And they finish up with two recognisable characters. There's a man in a small boat called a bark, and a lady in a small boat, and she seems to be holding onto a hat as if it's a windy day. These two figures on the left of the highlighted area are representations of the objects that we now call Orion and Sirius. Remember that Gary showed you Orion and Sirius in our present night sky? Well, here they are, represented by the ancient Egyptians. We can't say that character, Sahu, its name in ancient Egyptian, is exactly the same as Orion, but it stars in that area. And we can say with reasonable certainty that the lady does represent the star that we call Sirius. So we have a list of stars, and then we have some planets. And here we have two planets. They are falcon-headed figures, again standing in small boats. And these are Jupiter and Saturn. Mars is missing. It's a feature of this particular family of astronomical diagrams that Mars is missing for some reason. Some people think that's terribly, terribly significant, and other people think they just made a mistake. So Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, when he's present, all depicted the same way, falcon-headed gods in little boats. Then we have another group of stars characterised by the constellation of two turtles. You can just make out the two turtles at the bottom there. They're more Decan stars. And then at the end have Mercury and Venus. Venus is depicted as a heron or a phoenix. Mercury was thought to be an evil planet and so wasn't given a figure of his own. Its name is just spelt out in hieroglyphs. So this is how we decode an astronomical diagram. And once you've learnt the elements, you find that nearly all the astronomical diagrams have these same elements. They may look slightly different, but usually they're there. So let's try out this theory on a different ceiling. This is one that you can go and see in Egypt. And do go to Egypt because they really, really want you to go. They really need you to go right now to bolster the economy with the tourist industry. But if you go to this temple, the Ramesseum, the ceiling of the main part that's still standing is made out of stone slabs. And if you look very, very carefully, they're carved. And if you look even more carefully and zoom in, you will see that there is an astronomical diagram, and it's easier to see in a drawing here. This would have been painted originally, but the paint is all gone. So what have we got here? In the centre, we've got a hippo and the foreleg with his horns. We've got some crocodiles there as well. It's the circumpolar group. Either side, two processions of deities, the circumpolar deities that accompany the northern stars. We also have, in the top register, a list of stars, the same ones, the decans, finishing up with the man in the boat, Orion, the lady in the boat, Sirius. 3 planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. Some more stars, including 2 turtles, 2 tortoises, and finally 2 planets with Venus depicted as a bird. Along the bottom, we've got something which looks quite different from the Senenmut ceiling, but in fact, these are figures of the lunar months, not circles anymore, but figures. And the king, in this case, the very famous pharaoh, Ramesses II, himself offering to the gods of the lunar months. Therefore, we have all the same elements as Senenmut, but we also have something different going along the top. Not only do we have lunar months, but we have the names of the months of the civil year as well. One of the features of ancient Egypt is that for the whole of the civilization, they ran 2 calendars in parallel, one based on the moon and one based approximately on the sun. We're going to need this idea of a civil calendar for later, so let's go into a bit more detail about that. The Egyptian civil year lasted exactly 365 days. It was divided into 3 seasons, named Achet, Peret, and Shemu, and each season had 4 months in it. And they don't seem to be very adventurous with their choice of month names with the civil calendar, because it's just first month of Achet, second month of Achet, third, fourth, and then Peret, etc. Each one of these months had exactly 30 days in it. Lovely, neat, regular calendar. It meant that you could divide your 30-day month into 3 10-day weeks. The first 10-day week of the month, middle one, and the last one. And we call these 10-day periods decades, which is really quite confusing because we usually think of decades being 10-year periods. But for the purposes of Egyptology, these 10-day weeks are called decades. So that makes up 12 months, 30 days each, 360 days. What shall we do with the extra 5 days? Well, it's clear that the Egyptian civil calendar was a very neat calendar to use for accounting, and ancient Egypt was definitely a civilization full of bureaucrats who kept count of everything. And it was very nice and even to use the civil calendar with the 30-day months. But the 5 days at the end of the year were festival days. They were dedicated to different gods. They're called the epigomenal days. The 5 extra days on the year is the translation of what the Egyptians called these 5 days. So there's our civil calendar, which we're going to need. Now, we've seen that in the ceiling with 3 registers in the Ramesseum, the civil calendar just appeared along the top of the diagram. But there's one astronomical diagram that has a greater relationship with the civil calendar, and it has another interesting and unique feature. We're going to go now from where we've been talking about in the New Kingdom around 1200 BC, a bit more recently, to this artifact, which is from around 350 BC. It is not a temple or tomb, it's a sarcophagus, a stone sarcophagus, not for a human, not for a pharaoh, but for a bull, a sacred bull that was buried with full funeral rites. There are quite a number of these sequences of sacred bulls in Egypt that were selected because of certain markings and treated very well during their lives. And when they died, they would be buried, mummified, buried properly, and another young bull would be chosen to take their place. This one giant stone sarcophagus has carved on the inside of its lid, where you'd expect the ceiling, the universe, the depiction of the sky, it has an astronomical diagram. And even though we're so much later in history, the format is still very much the same. Let's look at the south half first. It's better preserved. Here we have a sequence of star names and figures associated with the star names. This one goes all the way along the top row, and unusually, we're reading this time from left to right, just to confuse you, all the way along the top row and the beginning of the lower row. And you can see the 2 people in the little boats at the end of the list, in the second register there, a man and a woman, Orion and Sirius again. So here are our decans, our calendrical or timekeeping stars. We have 2 hawk-headed figures in boats. So here we have a diagram which harks all the way back to the early one, the first one of Senenmut, in that it leaves out Mars. Jupiter and Saturn are present, but still they're perpetuating the missing Mars pattern. some more stars, including the two turtles, and finally Mercury and Venus. So far, all standard. But let's have a look at the other half of the sarcophagus lid. Oh, I should have pointed out here, the civil calendar is going along the top, as it was in the Ramesseum version, along the top of the stars in this half. Let's turn it round, and unfortunately the bottom edge of the sarcophagus has been damaged, probably when people were trying to get into the sarcophagus to rob the mummy of the bull. It might have been damaged, or maybe when it was being moved. But luckily, because we now know what we expect in the other half, we can reconstruct what was going on there. We have in the middle the circumpolar group of the northern stars, including the hippo, the bovine foreleg, crocodiles, etc. And on each side of that, we have the circumpolar deities, the two processions of gods that always accompany that northern group. But we also have something unique on this half of this diagram. What you can see here are little drawings of that foreleg, that northern constellation, in various different orientations. Let's take a closer look at this idea of the foreleg. The foreleg is the same group of stars that we call the Big Dipper, or people in the UK called the Plough. And it appears that the ancient Egyptians had a similar idea of constellations as we do nowadays, the join the dots and then put a picture over the top idea. So we think of this thing, the Big Dipper, as being formed by this shape. The Egyptians clearly thought of it very similarly, just one small difference, being joined together like that. And they called it the foreleg of the ox. That's the shape they thought it made. Interestingly, this part of the ox was the choice bit that was used for offerings in temples. So the idea of a foreleg, it's a special joint of meat, the best joint of meat, maybe. So we have our notion of this special group of stars being a constellation called the foreleg. And what we see on that bull sarcophagus are drawings of this group of stars in different attitudes throughout the civil year. So they're grouped in sets of 3. And each set of 3 represents the orientations of the foreleg during a night in a period of the year. So this is the first one. It's in the first month of Akhet, so the first month of the Egyptian civil year. And it says each representation of the foreleg is labelled beginning of the night, middle of the night, and end of the night. Now the problem here, as you astronomers will surely know, is that the Big Dipper is rotating throughout the night. And so the representation you see in this group of 3 can't possibly be true, because it rotates from the beginning of the night to the middle of the night and apparently stays stationary until the end of the night. Well, that can't happen in reality. And unfortunately, if we look at the orientations through the rest of this table, we see that this is a very muddled document. It's not what we would find accurate, but that's not really the point. The point is that it suggests that somebody thought this was important enough that they'd made observations, they'd recorded them, however accurately or not, and then those observations had been incorporated into an astronomical diagram, and they turn up on this very high status object, this granite sarcophagus of a bull. This is the only representation of this that has survived to the present and been found. And it just shows you the tantalizing problem which faces me as a researcher of this area. It suggests a whole set of observations. It suggests an idea of how the sky was moving, a desire to encapsulate that movement. it's a bit like our dipper clock that you can make nowadays, the Big Dipper moving around throughout the night. But by the time it's been copied and copied and copied, perhaps many times before it appears on this sarcophagus, unfortunately, the accuracy or the meaning is very hard to reconstruct. And it's only survived because it's been carved into a granite sarcophagus, which must be one of the most difficult things to destroy that you could imagine. It's survived because it's in stone. It's not on a scrap of papyrus or wood. It's not perpetuated by word of mouth. And this is true of the study of astronomy in the ancient world. We have only a small amount of what would have existed, and we're constantly dealing with thinking about what has survived to the present and what must be missing and lost to us now. These astronomical diagrams, these star maps, we've seen how they go all the way from around 1500 BC all the way through to here, 350 BC on this bull sarcophagus, and indeed they go further through to Roman times, a span of about 1500 years of repeated use, slight modifications, but generally remaining the same. Here, for example, are a set of astronomical ceilings in a columned hall in the Roman temple of Hathor at Dendera in Egypt. This set of ceilings, carved and painted in Roman times and restored quite recently to see the beautiful colours, contain Egyptian elements, purely Egyptian elements. On the right there, we have the bull's foreleg with its horns. We have the hippo holding on to it behind. And then behind the hippo, we have a strange goat-fish character. Well, that sounds kind of familiar. It's Capricorn. The zodiac has arrived, and it arrives from outside Egypt and is incorporated as an element in these later astronomical diagrams alongside the purely Egyptian circumpolar group. The most famous of these zodiacs, incorporating both Egyptian ideas and new foreign ideas, is the circular zodiac from that same temple, Dendera. The original is now in the Louvre Museum in Paris. And although this looks very different to the previous Egyptian astronomical diagram, star maps that we've seen, it looks a lot closer to what we would expect. For one thing, it's circular. But in fact, when we break it down into pieces, we still find in the centre the hippo holding onto a foreleg. Around the outer rim, figures representing the same group of stars, the Deccan stars, and especially included a figure of a man running, that's Orion, and instead of a woman, we've got a cow in a little boat, that's Sirius. The 5 planets that you can see with your naked eye are still there, but something's changed. They're now all presented as equals or equivalent. We've no longer got the grouping of 3 falcon-headed objects and the bird and just the label for Mercury and Venus. So the distinction which had been made between the planets, which we know are between the Sun and the orbit of the Earth, Mercury and Venus, and the superior planets, the planets that have their orbits outside that of the Earth, that distinction that has been present throughout Egyptian history in Greco-Roman times disappeared, and all the planets were treated as a group of 5 similar objects instead of 2 groups, a group of 3 objects and a group of 2. Quite an interesting development in itself. So we've reached the end of Egyptian history when it comes to star maps. And we saw how one of them, the bull sarcophagus, included an astronomical table of information. Let's move on to the second type of document. Oh, I forgot to say, the zodiac is there. All of the 12 constellations that we recognise are on that zodiac, again, from a foreign country, from the Mesopotamian region, arriving in Egypt. There are a number of different sorts of astronomical tables from different time periods in ancient Egypt. And I chose just one to talk to you about tonight because it's the one that I'm working on right now. And I can tell you a little bit about recent developments in research in this area. We have to go back now, back in time even further before the sealing of Sennamat, back to around 2000 BC. And instead of looking at high status tombs like one in the Valley of the Kings or in big temples, we look for these objects on coffins. Coffins of humans, not bulls this time, and not of pharaohs and very high courtiers, but of noble people, wealthy people, but non-royal people usually. This is the type of coffin that I spend quite a lot of time looking at. It's a wooden coffin, rectangular. It's covered in hieroglyphs, inside and out. Again, this coffin is like a room in a temple or a tomb. It's a model, a miniature model of the universe. The texts around the coffin are a manual of instructions for how to navigate through the afterlife. They're spells for protection so that bad things don't happen to you. They go into quite a lot of detail about what the afterlife looks like and how you should behave in it, who you will meet. The texts that we're looking for, because they're about stars, will be, where we expect to find them, will be on the inside of the lid. And again, in the mini-universe of the coffin, the inside of the lid is the sky. The inside of the lid is sometimes plastered to a light-coloured background, and the texts are written on that surface. Usually they're ordinary spells from this body of literature called the coffin text, but on just a few coffins there are a table of star names. The table is divided into quadrants. There's a slice down the middle with 4 figures in it. And the 4 figures shown here, top to bottom, the sky goddess, her name is Nut, the foreleg, the Dipper constellation, the Orion figure, and the figure for Sirius as well. Across the middle horizontally, there's an offering text. And again, because we're in ancient Egypt, we're reading from right to left. Here's a different example, and perhaps on this one you can begin to make out that each box in the table finishes up with a star figure, here painted in white. We can see that the table is divided into 4 quadrants by these texts running down and across, but it's made up of squares. Here's an example that's displayed nicely in a museum where you can actually read it. A lot of them are displayed so that the coffin lid is just above the coffin, and you have to sort of bend over and peer underneath to see this. This one's the most comfortable one to look at. It's in a museum in Aswan, in the far south of Egypt. If we zoom in on a portion of it, this one's written quite hastily. It's just black ink. It's written rather cursively. This is a portion above the horizontal break, and there are no big star symbols here, which is a good thing actually because it condenses it all down. Now, if you can pick out your favourite hieroglyphs, and here I've picked out some fish, a pair of fish. You can see those fish move across the table in a diagonal pattern. I've tried to bring that out in the graphic below with a pair of fish, or indeed any of the other star names, moving from left to right in a diagonal pattern, climbing up the table. Across the top of the table are dates. Each column is labelled with one of those 10-day periods, the decades that make up the civil year. So we've got dates along the top and a table full of cells which contain star names. And the particular stars that are named in these tables are those Deccan stars that we saw in the astronomical diagrams. So it's really handy, if you don't read hieroglyphs, to be able to pull this into a kind of schematic idea of what's going on. So here's a a diagram of what's happening in the table. We have the dates going along the top. We have 12 rows split in the middle by the horizontal offering text going across the middle. And we have a maximum of 40 columns. 36 of them are labelled with the 10-day periods of the civil year. And then we can have up to 4 columns on the end of the table as well. Here, each star name, I've labelled it with a number. So we start at the top right and say that's star 1. And star 1 only appears once. Star 2 appears below star 1 and at the top of the next column. And here you get the diagonal pattern, and this is why we call them diagonal star tables. And we can see that these stars go on through the columns of the table throughout the year. Now, something interesting happens here. When you get to the 36th star, new star names are introduced, and here we conventionally use letters to label the stars in this portion of the table. And those stars form a triangle area at the end of the table. So again, very, very prosaically, we call the stars here ordinary decans in the main body of the table, and the stars in this area are the triangle decans. And if you remember the astronomical diagram, the star list was in 2 parts. There was a larger part finishing up with Orion and Sirius, and then there were some planets, and then there was a small list of stars. The small group of stars at the end are the triangle decans, and here they are on this table. This is the way that they were portrayed. Now we can use this schema, the way of labelling the different stars, to investigate the real tables that we have. We can label each star name with a number or a letter. And so we can look at a real coffin lid and record what's going on. Now here you see a coffin lid which is on display in a museum in Tübingen in Germany. And here's the problem. The coffin lids were painted. Some of them were painted nicely, some of them were painted really quickly. And they started at the beginning of the table, and they continued to draw columns on until they'd filled the coffin lid. And then they would stop. And that means that most of the star tables that have survived to the present day do not have the full possible 40 columns. We only have the first part. I suppose really it depends on how tall the person was that was buried in the coffin. The taller the person, the more columns we get. So it's a pity that there weren't more taller people. But really it's a matter of quality. Sometimes they're beautifully laid out, there's lots of space, beautifully painted, but they finish very early. And it's actually, for my research, it's the last bit that's the most interesting and important bit, so it's quite frustrating. So I suppose the question that will be in all your minds at the moment is, okay, so it's a table of star names. What is it for? And why do they occur on coffins? Well, for a start, I mentioned that coffins are covered with texts which tell the person what's going to happen to them in the afterlife, how to get the best out of that experience and survive it. So these star tables are appearing in a context which is not what we call scientific. It's what we would think of as being a religious context. That means that these star tables must have had some religious significance that would mean that some people, and we have only about 25 of these objects, but some people chose to have a manual of stars on their coffin lid. They're all early RASC members, I think. So perhaps these two represent a manual for behaviour in the afterlife. In the earlier period in Egypt, where pharaohs were buried in pyramids, the pharaohs were thought to become stars, in particular the circumpolar stars in the northern part of the sky, the ones that go round and round but don't set. Well, these aren't the coffins of pharaohs, these are the coffins of noblemen. Some of them were for women as well. But maybe by this time they were feeling they too could become stars, not the high status northern ones, but the stars which rose and set, these timekeeping stars. The 12 rows have been interpreted as standing for the 12 hours of the night. And this is an interpretation which is borne out by a later version. The single version of this type of table that doesn't appear on a coffin actually appears in a temple, and it labels the rows as hours. But was that the original understanding of the rows, or was that a later development? If the rows in the table do represent hours, was this originally a timekeeping device that you could read the hour of the night, not by the striking of a clock, but by the movement of stars throughout the sky? I arranged that specially. Unfortunately, they don't come with a manual, not even written in hieroglyphics. And we have no modern parallel to these things. So a lot of questions about these tables, the origin of the tables, who developed them, when exactly, what for, remain. So to finish, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about my current research on these tables and to indicate why I think it's important to do this work. The majority of coffins which contain these tables came from near the modern town of Asyut in the middle of Egypt. Nowadays, you can't see any of these in situ. They've been excavated, they've been taken to museums. So my colleague Rob Cockcroft and I spent a month last year in Egypt working in museums, in the Cairo Museum, with some of the tables that are not on public display. You can only actually see one of these tables if you go to the Museum of Egyptian Antiquities in Cairo, the biggest collection of Egyptian antiquities in the world. They have 8 of these, but only one of them is on display. And again, the way the coffin is displayed, you have to get down and kind of look up under to see the table. So I imagine that the 99% of people never even know it's there. But we were looking at some of the tables in storage, and some of the tables that are on coffins that are on display, but they're closed, so you can't see them. So we actually had them out of the cases and were able to look at them. And we also looked in the Nubian Museum in Aswan. The easiest way, though, to go and see these coffins is actually to look around in museums in Europe. Quite a few of them are on display. So 2 in Egypt, as I said, 1 in the Cairo Museum, 1 in the museum in Aswan. But in Europe, you can see 1 in Vienna, 1 in Turin, and there's 1 not on display, 2 in Hildesheim, of which 1 is on display. 1 I've shown you already from Tübingen is on display. There's also 1 in Paris. You can see the coffin, but it's closed, so you can't see the table. But as I said, not everybody notices a star table when they see one or recognise it. So even some of the ones on display have not or had not yet been described fully. For example, by 2012, it was known that there was a full table in a museum in a town called Malawi, not the country Malawi, but a city in Egypt called Malawi. And here I've said Malawi, question mark, is there one? On display, apparently in a museum. People researching coffins from other points of view had remarked on it but not recorded it in any way, no details, no photographs, etc. So Rob Cockcroft and I made the journey to Malawi while we were in Egypt. We went in June 2013. In the museum, we had obtained permission to work, and we began to look at the coffins to find out which one might have star tables on. So here we are in Malawi, and here is the display of sarcophagi and coffins in that museum. Malawi is a place that tourists don't visit, and indeed even people who'd worked archaeologically in the area couldn't tell me a lot about the museum. So this was a completely speculative journey we went on, and we looked at each of the coffins. Is it this one? Is it that one? This one's closed. Is it going to be in there? Just our luck. But no, the final one that you can just see peeking out at the end of this photograph, that was the one we wanted to see. And the coffin lid was raised up a little, and we could see underneath. But we weren't allowed to take photographs. So we sat and we stood and we craned over and we looked and we drew. We drew everything that we could see on the lid. You can see how it's supported up there. The bits underneath the wood, we couldn't see those bits, but mostly we could guess what was on there because of the pattern, the diagonal pattern. Now, by this time, after about an hour or an hour and a half of turning upside down to write things down, we needed a break. So we stood up and we took a look around the rest of the museum. We actually went back to one of the coffins. We'd looked at this one, peeked underneath. It looked blank in the lid. But then we took a closer look at the little piece of wood, the last batten that held the coffin lid together. It's this little bit of wood here crossing the planks underneath. And although the rest of the lid was plain white, we could just about make out on this lines and a few hieroglyphs. It's part of a star table. So we start craning over again and drawing that too. It's another fragment. We didn't expect it. Nobody knew it was there. So we had a wonderful time that day. It was fantastic. And we went home and we wrote it all up. And pretty soon, a couple of weeks after we got home, the second revolution in Egypt happened. We were quite glad that we weren't there at the time, but we continued writing and we submitted our first results for publication. And August 2013 rolled around, and then the news came. That museum was completely looted. Every single movable object was taken out of it. The things that they couldn't move or didn't look valuable, the wooden coffins, were smashed. And you can see this is a picture in the middle of that devastation. And at first, the reports were that all of the wooden coffins had been burnt. And this chokes me up because my colleague, my Egyptologist colleague, Monica Hanna, who's actually from Malawi, it's her hometown, she went into the museum with the police and she took all the remaining objects, the fragments of objects, the bits of broken statue, and people were shooting into the museum while she was doing this. And they got these pieces out. And we're told that the two coffins with the bits of star table on them are in safe storage in a magazine nearby. But we haven't got proof of that. We hope this year to find out that they have been saved, but as of now, we don't know. And it just goes to show, 4,000 years these objects had waited, with nobody being able to, well, they could read the hieroglyphs, but they didn't understand the importance of the astronomical document on them. And now they may be destroyed forever. We were there 8 weeks before the museum looting. So really, this has given us an enormous sense of urgency about the work we're doing. History of science is usually quite a sedate process because you think, well, it's not going anywhere. But unfortunately, sometimes it does. We are documenting all of these astronomical tables that we can find, and we're making these available to scholars and any interested people on our website, which is a database of astronomical tables. Here you can look up the different sources, you can see the schematics. We're getting permissions to publish photographs of the ones that we're allowed to show, but you can even see the way that the star names were written and compare them on each coffin. Apart from Orion and Sirius, which are part of these timekeeping stars, these decans, we don't know which stars these represent. But by looking into these documents and trying to piece together how they were observed, we can find out more information about astronomical activities in ancient Egypt. And just one final result, that coffin lid that was on display in Aswan, we found on it a thing that had not been recorded in its publication at all, hidden under a water stain. This star name here is a new one. This is a new Egyptian star, the first one found in at least 50 years, just hiding there. Everyone else had been working from black and white photographs, couldn't read the hieroglyphs. So we actually found a new star. And over the next year, we hope to add to that database all of the star maps, the astronomical diagrams of the type that I've been talking to you about. So you can visit the database here if you're interested and get in contact as well. And if you ever visit Egypt to see the pyramids and the tombs and the temples, please remember this talk and don't forget to look up. Thank you very much indeed.
So, thank you, Sarah. That exceeded my expectations. Wonderful. We have time for some questions here, and I'd like to start off with the first question. But just if you have a question, raise your hand. We have two runners with microphones. We'd like to make sure everyone can hear the question. So for me, I was wondering why 40 columns? We've talked about decades as 10 days. We talked about 360 days. Why would they come up with 40? What is that? What's the significance of that?
Well, 36 of them are the 10-day periods, so that makes 360 days. And this is the bit that really gets quite technical, because the year isn't 360 days long. It's 365 and a little bit. So the bit where you finish the numbered ones, 1 to 36, you'd expect really to be able to use 1 again, but it's not good enough. Because the solar year is 365 days, your decan 1 is half a period off. So that's why you have to start adding those new star names with letters on at the end. Then when you get to the last column, it's almost full of those. The column on the far left, the 40th column, was labelled for the 5 extra days of the year. So it's a half width, if you like, column. Now, that's a list of all 12 of these triangle decans. The 3 columns beforehand are just a list of all the other ones. So you get decans 1 to 12 in the 37th column, 13 to 24, and so on. So you've got a list of all of the stars in those 4 columns.
Terrific. Any questions from anyone? Okay, Sylvie? Oh, lots of questions. Just give us a chance.
Thank you for this marvelous talk. My name is Janet Tulloch. I'm a religious studies scholar at Carleton. I work in the area of early Christianity and Greek and Roman material culture. I was interested in the gold sarcophagus you mentioned, but really didn't give us very much of a clue of what that middle line of offerings was about. And so I'm curious if you're able to interpret that and what it says. Thank you.
Sure. On the astronomical diagrams, the text that surrounds the diagram is usually nothing astronomical at all. It usually contains the names and titles of the reigning king of the time, usually the builder of the monument or sometimes the owner of the sarcophagus. The band of offering text which goes down the middle of the star tables, the diagonal star tables, an offering text is a formulaic text which is asking for gifts for the dead person, actually the ka spirit of the dead person, and usually it will ask for these gifts to be given by Anubis or usually Osiris, the god of the dead. However, the offering text that's used in the middle of the star tables actually is asking for offerings from the gods of the sky, so the names of the decans themselves and those important celestial figures, the goddess Nut, the foreleg, asking for gifts for them. So it's unique to those star tables, not what we would recognise as astronomical in the scientific way, but asking astronomical figures as gods.
Hi, so my name is Frank Marshall. I'm one of the members. I'm just wondering, what did the Egyptians make of the changing skies? So what did they make of meteor showers or comets maybe even? Do you have any ideas about that? And also, why does Mercury have a negative connotation?
Okay, Mercury negative connotation, it's associated with the god of chaos, storms, evil, Set or Seth. Quite why it's evil, we don't know, but there's a story that's recounted about it in a New Kingdom funerary text, which is that the sun god captured it and imprisoned it in the north of the sky and tied it up to a stake and put lots of fierce animals, hippos and crocodiles, around it to prevent it wandering to the south of the sky. So that's an explanation of why those stars go round and round and round the North Celestial Pole. Okay, what was the first?
Comets.
The comets. Comets and meteors. Yeah, it's interesting in Egyptian astronomy, the bits that are kind of missed out Things like eclipses are not present. The moon is there in terms of lunar months, but not depicted in the astronomical ceilings like other things. And the transient phenomena are more or less absent. There's one very interesting bit in a piece of literature where there's a talking snake, and he's describing that his family was wiped out by a fire that fell from the sky. Sounds incredibly like the extinction of the dinosaurs, an asteroid impact, and all sorts of things. Very, very strange. And I think there's another account of perhaps a meteor being seen by the army at one stage, but nothing systematic.
Sylvia, on your side?
Yeah, on my side.
Gary, again. Now, you said there were 12 houses of the zodiac that they used for, well, astrology back then. Of course, we know there are 13 constellations on the ecliptic, and finally astrology has moved to 13, though Ophiuchus being the 13th. Was it just an unlucky number that they didn't want to use 13, or because of precession, or why was it only 12?
Well, whoever decided it was 12, it wasn't an Egyptian, because the 12 figures arrive from abroad, and they were just 12 at a time. The notion of whether the ancient Egyptians were aware of precession is a controversial one. You will find some people saying that they were aware of it. They certainly could have observed it if they were looking at star movements in this way. They could have, for example, worked out a lot earlier that their civil year wasn't exactly a solar year and so forth. It's very difficult. The Egyptian civilization provides a lot of written material for an ancient civilization of its time, but it doesn't always provide the details that we want to know about.
I'm Haley, and I was wondering how you learned the hieroglyphics.
Well, Haley, I've always been interested in hieroglyphics since your age or maybe before. But in order to study this area, I had to learn them. It was such a chore. I spent a year travelling down to University of Oxford and studying with somebody whose research area is Egyptian language. And so this was obviously a very onerous task, and I hated every minute of it. Honestly, they say that when the things that happen when you're young, they're the best things. Honestly, spending a year just learning hieroglyphics, wonderful, wonderful. But yeah, you learn it like any other language. You learn to read the script, and then of course there's a language underneath that, nouns and verbs and adjectives and tenses and so forth. And your tutor sets you examples, and you work through them and make mistakes. It's just the only thing is you can't really pronounce it very well because we don't know how it sounded, so we just guess.
Okay, two more quick questions. Sylvie? And one for...
The length of the civilization, the Egyptian civilization, I'm just wondering how these symbols evolved over time. At the very beginning, was there much of a difference towards the end?
The Egyptian language was around for at least 3,500 years. And yes, the language evolved hugely. And in fact, when you're learning to read, you start in a period of language called Middle Egyptian, where there's lots of literature and it's regular. But then you have to learn either forwards or backwards to visit other parts of the language. So yes, it changed, the language changed, the script changed a lot.
Last question over there.
I'm with a Christian historical studies group as well, and your lecture is fascinating indeed, and you're absolutely right. There's so much more we don't know than what we do know. A few years ago, my wife and I were at the Great Museum in Cairo at Tahrir Square before the uprising, and I remember telling my wife that, I said, look around in this great museum. Most of the objects here are contrary to radical Muslim law. And I told her, I says, you know, if radical Muslims ever take over Egypt, this museum is in grave danger. And it appears that the prediction was true. You know, I really do believe that people like you should be looking for international protection for the great heritage that is in Egypt, that religious wars don't destroy those museums. So God bless you for doing that, and I hope you're going to lobby for some protection for those museums that these things will be preserved for world heritage.
And I'd like to say that there are many, many Egyptians who agree with you and who are working and, like Monica Hanna, are acting to save Egypt's heritage because it belongs to the Egyptian people and to the world. So there are a lot of people inside Egypt as well who are very much aware of the value of what they have.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. I'm so sorry we have to cut it off here. Sarah will be here during the break and also at the end of the meeting here. Gary, can you come for a second? Sarah, thank you so much. We'd like to give you just a token of our appreciation, and thank you for coming all this way. Wonderful presentation. Thanks for preparing it. We have a meteorite gift for you, and thanks again. From Gary.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. On behalf of the Ottawa Centre, I'd like to thank you for an excellent talk to open our eyes of how astronomy began. And I can tell by the passion in your voice, especially on that nasty bit of evangelism, how passionate you are about these little squiggles that we know nothing of pretty well, but you open our eyes to it. So again, thank you very much, and take this on our appreciation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just before we go to break, I want to do one last thing. Monica Ferguson. Monica, could you come up to the front, please? So you may remember Monica Ferguson. She delivered that spellbinding presentation, Maps of the Cosmos, in February. And Monica, I didn't have a chance to say thank you. Come on up. Come on. didn't have an opportunity to say thank you to you because everyone was crowded around you. You had a wonderful display. Gary as well, please. We'd like to give you also a meteorite as well.
I just said before the same thing. But get over here. Oh, but again, thank you for really opening up our eyes to, what did I say was the word after that? Oh, yeah. But no, truly enjoyed last month. It's stuff that none of us really partake in, but I'm sure a few of us walked away wanting to know more. And through your diligence, we opened up our eyes.
It was an absolute honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. All right.
Mike, anybody else?
No, that's it. That's it. Okay, folks, I see 9:25. At 9, we're going to have a 10-minute break for, we'll come back and meet at 9:35. Next slide. If you're interested, here are some of the membership benefits locally and nationally. All right. Any questions, come see us. So 10 minutes, please. Thanks. Okay, let's get started, everyone, here. The next segment is observation reports, where members of our group and some associated astronomy groups are going to be sharing their reports. First up is, I believe, Eric LeMay. Please, next slide, Gary. Oh, yes, and I should say, by the way, we have a surprise mystery guest that you'll see. Eric?
Hi there. So this is the Andromeda Galaxy. I took this. I took this back in August of 2013 at the North Frontenac Dark Sky Preserve. So Andromeda lies about 2.5 million light years away from us. You've also got a couple other galaxies in the frame here as well too. You've got. Oh, sorry. What did I do?
Talk about it.
Nice. There we go. So you've got M32 here as well too, another satellite galaxy of the Andromeda Galaxy, and you've got M110 here. So when I processed this image, well, first of all, the exposure was about 2 hours of exposure. I used my Takahashi FSQ 106, a Starlight Express SXVR H18 for this, and I used my focal reducer to achieve f 3.64. when I went to go process it, I noticed that there was a lot of there's a huge light gradient from the bottom left to the top right, and it was a little difficult to get rid of that. I used Pix Insight, and through a few of the tools that are in that program, I found it was a lot more useful than processing it with Photoshop. And one of the things that I struggled with was to get rid of all of the stars so I could have just the galaxy. But then I thought about it a little more and kind of realized that after Gary had mentioned to me about finding a bunch of the clusters in the actual galaxy, that by removing the stars, I would also be removing a lot of the content in the galaxy as well too, namely the globular clusters. So what I did is I just took a crop here, and so everything that you see here, it's a whole bunch of little small dots. They're not all visible from wherever you are in the audience there, but this is just some of them as well too. There's hundreds of them. So if I were to remove all of those globular clusters, it would really change what the actual object looked like, right? So, yeah, so I decided to do this instead. I figured it would be a little more interesting to look at that than the alternative.
Can I mention something?
Sure.
Just so I can be heard. Just for perspective, it's worth considering that each of these little tiny dots is a globular star cluster that contains anything from, say, 10,000 to perhaps 1,000,000 stars like our sun. Each little tiny dot. So that'll put the whole thing into perspective. And for those who aren't familiar with the night sky, the Andromeda Galaxy, in this picture here, where we look at it from the upper left to lower right along its length, you could fit 5 full moons along that. So it's actually very large in the sky. You don't need a big telescope to see it, but it takes photographs like this to see the incredible detail. To the eye, it's an almost detailless fuzzy blob with a bright center fading off to the edges. Just a little perspective.
Thank you, Glenn.
I was just about to say that. Well, stick a fork in me, I'm done.
Thank you, Eric. Your work continues to be impressive. Jim Thompson, please.
Hey, these are a couple of moon shots I took the middle of last month. Starting at the top, one of my favorite craters to look at, Anaxagoras. Very young crater, only about 450 million years old. That's relatively young. You can tell by the bright rays system coming out from it. And I was surprised to see how far into the crater I could see this evening, and that's because of the libration that particular night. It was so leaning forward that you can actually see the North Pole. This crater here is Peary. This is Beard and Peary. And the rim right here of this crater, right about there, is the North Pole of the moon. So we can actually, on this evening, see past the North Pole to the far side of the moon to one of the Russian named craters, which we never see, Rozhdestvensky. I'm kind of rusty on my Russian. Next, please. So my real focus for the evening was to try to catch some lunar domes. And this is one of my nemeses, Mons Runker. It's a very large volcanic dome. It's about 70 kilometers across and about just over a kilometer high. A massive volcanic feature. But its position and its color makes it really difficult to get a good image of it. So I think I didn't do too bad on this evening. And much easier to see are the two lunar domes down here. Gruithuisen, get these right, this is Gruithuisen Gamma and Gruithuisen Delta. You can actually see the caldera right in the middle of the one on the left. So that was a pretty good shot. Next, please. Another one of my favorite areas to observe is the area around Aristarchus, another very young crater, again about 450 million years old. Very bright. I really like the detail in the crater that came out today. You can see some terracing see the central peak. And what really surprised me was for the Schroeder's Valley, everybody, well, most people who have observed the moon have seen it, but what you haven't seen is the continuation of the valley. There's a central valley that runs through the middle and continues out here. And you can just see the shadow of it there. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a faint shadow, which rarely see. So I was happy with that. Next, please. And the last lunar dome feature that I was trying to catch, it's along the same line, luckily, was the Marius Hills. So this is crater Marius, Kepler, and Encke, which I believe you're going to hear a lot more about shortly. This region here looks kind of pimpled and bumpy. They are actually hundreds of volcanic domes. It's an area about 1 to 2 kilometers across or around. These domes are 200 to 500 meters high. Oh, sorry. I read that wrong. My notes are hard to read here. The area is actually 300 kilometers across, this area. Each dome is 1 to 2 kilometers across. So each of these little bump features are about 1 to 2 kilometers across and 200 to 500 meters tall. Now, one thing that I was also trying to catch, I have been unsuccessful so far, is Rima Marius. It's a valley that runs somewhere in here, and I just didn't pull it out tonight, or on that particular night. Maybe when the sun is coming from the other direction, it'll come out better, but I didn't quite get it that night. That's it. Thank you. Oh, sorry, that's not it. Okay, I'm switching hats now. The Ottawa Astronomy Workshop Series, this is just a reminder that we are having the next one next Friday. The topic is your favorite astronomy book. We're looking for people who have a favorite astronomy book, whether it's a novel or if it's more of a scientific book, to share it with us. Share it with not only the members of the group at the workshop, but also we broadcast live on Night Sky Network, and you can share it with people all over the globe live. So if you are interested in participating, contact me, please. This is my email address. There's also a website where I have all of the past workshops, slide presentations posted if you want to kind of see what we've done in the past. It's very informal. We just kind of sit down around a table with an overhead projector and we just talk about astronomy stuff. So, yeah, the more the merrier. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Jim really doesn't take enough credit for this, the workshop series here. It's a different format than what we have tonight, but you more of a relaxed question and answer. Jim, it's your inspiration here. You're really an inspiring fellow with what you've done. Okay, the mystery guest. I've mentioned before Mike Werfs. And Mike, he runs a bed and breakfast with his wife in Baja Peninsula, very remote area. And we are delighted to have Mike Werfs join us tonight. So Mike, if you could join us, please.
So hi everybody. A while back I sent Mike a few of my solar images, or at least the ones that I thought turned out the best so far. And he thought it would be a good idea if I did an audio file to present them for you. Yes, a new Astro toy, a Lunt 152mm dedicated hydrogen alpha solar telescope. When my friend Attila Danko heard that I actually managed to get one of these, he was amazed, because I've been pestering my wife for years now to be able to get one. I tried all sorts of excuses like, oh, it'd be good for the business, blah, 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 but wives have BS meters, and she saw right through that. So I guess the advice is gentle, persistent pestering for a period of years is the way to go. So let's start with the first image. Some of you may recall that in January there was a really big sunspot group visible, visible even to the naked eye with a piece of welder's glass. It was known as AR 1944, and here you can see it's just starting to rotate into view. There's quite a few filaments. Those are prominences on the face of the sun, and on the edge you can't see anything because at that point I didn't have the camera settings right, and I had the gamma set too low, so there should be some spicules on the edge, but you can't see them in this image. You may also notice that the image isn't truly totally hydrogen alpha. It has aspects of white light as well. This is because the Lunt telescope is pressure tuned. As you tune it in, it increases the air pressure against the etalon and tunes in the hydrogen alpha. But a couple of the O-rings weren't working properly. They let go. They weren't. So I wasn't able to tune in to the hydrogen alpha spectrum 100%. I'm still waiting for some replacement O-rings, so hopefully soon I'll be able to do images totally in hydrogen alpha. But this one had some really good seeing, and the level of detail was pretty amazing, given that the sun's altitude really isn't that high in the sky at that time of the year in January, even though we're at 30 degrees latitude here in Baja California. The camera that I'm using for all of these images is a Point Grey Grasshopper 3, a USB 3 camera. It's really sensitive, good quantum efficiency, a big chip size, which is perfect for the moon and for the sun for imaging, and it has a fast frame rate. It has 26 frames per second, which is really good because it means you can gather a lot of frames in a relatively short time frame. So the next image is of this large sunspot group, AR 1944, as it was passing basically the middle of the sun, facing towards the Earth. And you can see this one's really mostly white light. There is some aspects of hydrogen alpha above and below the largest sunspot there, but there's some really cool detail in the umbra area of the sunspot. All of these images are stacks of around 150 to 200 frames done with AutoStacker, which is a freeware stacking program, and AVI Stack is also a really good one. Registax doesn't really work that well for me, so I mainly use those other programs for all of my stacking of images. The next image is sort of a close-up crop of a M-class prominence that happened on January 17th. And I just sort of did a region of interest box on the camera, which takes it down to about 1200 by 1200 and gives you a little bit faster frame rate. So this is recorded for 30 seconds, and you need to do a recording very short time frame, like 30-40 seconds, to really be able to freeze all of the motion, which happens in the spicules that you can see here on the edge of the solar limb. This is why having a camera which can do a really fast frame rate is kind of crucial, so that you can get all those frames in the best moments of seeing in a really short time frame. And the last image is another prominence. You can see a little detached bit to the left there on the bottom, and it's really quite amazing how quickly the shape changes over a really short period of time. You can really see that happening, which is quite exciting, since there's not too many things in astronomy that you can see movement in. So hopefully soon I'll be able to get my scope working in really in true hydrogen alpha, 100% hydrogen alpha light, and as the sun gets higher and higher in the sky, as spring and summer progresses, then maybe I'll be able to supply some very high-res solar images for you to show in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike. I know you're watching now. That's awesome. Since Mike sent those slides to us, he followed up with another image here that you're seeing, and he received the O-ring. He solved the pressure tuning problem, and you can see hydrogen alpha is much more prominent here, particularly in the prominence at about 8 o'clock there. I find this last image very interesting. When I received it, what went through my mind was just the sheer size of things. So just how massive is the prominence? Well, let's consider this. So I figured this is about that top edge of the image is about 3/4 of the radius of the sun, thereabout, give or take. Since the radius of the sun is 700,000 kilometers, then 3/4 of this length is about 525,000 kilometers. I estimate the prominence here to be about 1/10 of that distance, so about 52,500 kilometers, give or take. Now, since the diameter of the Earth, is 12,700 kilometers, we could fit 4 Earths side by side within this prominence. One of our guest speakers next month is going to be Ken Whitnell, and Ken has a very impressive solar setup, and he's told me he's seen prominences that stretch out to 300,000 kilometers. The sun everything about this sun is big. So, so that's it for the images. Our next speaker is Simon Hamner, and with images from Mike Wirfs. Just a time check, everyone. We're running about 10:35, so I apologize for running late, but this is a special night, and I hope you understand. Simon.
Okay, I'm prepared to bet dollars to donuts that everyone in this room knows what an impact crater is, and knows that they're circular in shape when seen from directly overhead, unless, of course, the impactor that formed the crater struck the surface at a very low oblique angle. Next one, please, Chris. After all, you only have to take a cursory look at the near side of the moon, our own moon. That's the side we can observe from Earth with our own backyard telescopes, to see that this must be true. But are you sure it's true? What if I told you it's false? And that most impact craters do indeed have a circular plan view immediately after impact, but that very rapidly after the initial impact, that circular shape evolves and in many cases becomes polygonal. And when I say many cases, I mean up to 20% of the impact craters on the moon. What if I told you that instead of growing old gracefully, impact craters actually grow old polygonally? Now tonight, I'm going to try and convince you of this using examples of generally well-known and therefore well-observed impact craters visible to amateur astronomers on the near side of the moon. And I'm prepared to bet that many of you have already looked at most of the examples that I'll be presenting tonight, and I'd be very interested to know how many of you have seen these craters as circular in outline. Next one, please, Chris. My partner in crime for this presentation is Mike Wirfs. Evening, Mike. One of the world's leading lunar images, as you've been told. Now, Mike is very well known to many of us here. He was based just outside of Ottawa before moving to clearer skies in Baja, Mexico, accompanied, of course, by his telescope equipment and cameras, and, of course, now his new telescope. Next one, please. His superb images of the moon's surface are regularly featured on the Lunar Picture of the Day website, and I would strongly recommend that you check them out in the original resolution, because in the original resolution, they are amazing. Next one, please. Now, here's one of the quintessential lunar impact craters, Tycho. I don't really need to point out where it is. It's right there. Note that all the slides that I show you will be accompanied by an insert at top right with a flashing green indicator to tell you where on the moon we're actually looking. Now, what do we see when we examine an impact crater like Tycho? We see the crater floor, in this case with its central peak, right there. It's readily distinguished from the raised crater rim, which you can see around here. But the rim itself is made of two very different components. Terraces, that's these things down here, and scarps, that's these bright things right at the outside. Now, the terraces are best seen on the east side of the crater, in this case, where they look like the pictures you might have seen in travel magazines of rice paddies decorating the steep hillsides in many Asian countries. The difference being that in the case of Tycho, these terraces result from an orderly collapse of the bedrock that formed the original inner wall of the rim as it slid into the initial impact cavity. Elsewhere around the rim, around here for example, it's more difficult to make out the distinctive terrace structure. This is because the collapse mechanism was perhaps more chaotic, resulting in large-scale messy landslides instead of neat and tidy terraces. Whatever the mechanism of flow of the collapsing material, terraces and landslides alike can leave scars in the outer part of the crater rim, essentially tall, steep cliffs known as scarps. And that's what this is here. This is an example of one of those tall, steep scarps. Now, if you now consider the base of the collapsed rim material separately from the outer perimeter of the impact crater, so here's the base of the collapsed material and here's the outer rim of the impact crater, both are approximately circular in outline in the case of Tycho. Next one, please. However, when I first saw this image taken by Mike Wirtz of the flooded, and when I say flooded, I don't mean flooded with water, but flooded with basalt lava, impact crater Lacus Mortis, I was puzzled, really puzzled. Although the lavas that flood the crater almost reach to the top of the crater rim, you can clearly see that the outer perimeter of the impact crater is a polygon. Look, here, and another, and another, and another. It's a polygon bounded by 5 preserved straight walls of approximately equal length, separated by a characteristic internal angle, that's this angle here between 2 of the straight segments, of 120 degrees. By the time I finish this talk, you will be sick of me saying 120 degrees. I suggested in a talk that Mike and I gave here back in 2009 that Lacus Mortis was in fact hexagonal in shape. Not only hexagonal, but symmetrically hexagonal in shape. Sarah, did you arrange for this one as well? Time's up. But I was completely stumped at that time. I still had no idea as to how this might have happened. Notice, by the way, over here, down in the corner, the straight sides on Hercules crater, and we'll come back to that later in the talk. Polygonal impact craters were first identified on the moon in the 1800s, so what I'm talking about here is nothing new. You might assume, as many have, that the impacts simply exploited pre-existing fractures in the bedrock. And this was indeed the fundamental conclusion of a recent PhD thesis done in 2009 from Finland. However, there's no sign of hexagonal fracture patterns in the area, or anywhere else on the moon for that matter. And in any event, from a geological perspective, hexagonal fracture patterns, especially symmetrical hexagonal fracture patterns, are difficult to impossible to produce tectonically, which I mean by sort of pushing and pulling the rocks around. Next one, please, Chris. Instead, during the 1950s and 1960s, scientists tended to attribute the straight sides that they saw on some lunar craters to pre-impact quadrilateral, that's a fancy term for diamond-shaped, conjugate fracture patterns known as the lunar grid that do indeed seem to occur all over the moon and are probably responsible for the diamond shape of the Aristarchus Plateau that contains the famous Schroeder's rill that Jim Thompson just showed you. So these red lines here, they are the diamond-shaped fracture pattern. But 4 fractures do not define a hexagon. And in addition, this ad hoc explanation, which it is, would not apply on other rocky planets and even ice moons, where these hexagonal crater patterns also form. Next one, please, Chris. So I started scanning the moon and lunar literature, looking for other examples of non-circular impact crater shapes, and I found them everywhere. Copernicus has to be one of the all-time favorite craters for amateur lunar observers. But it wasn't until I started asking myself about Lacus Mortis, which we just saw in a previous slide, that I realized that I'd looked at Copernicus many times, but I'd never seen it. Next one, please, Chris. And hit it a second time. Here still is Copernicus. It's a different one of Mike's images. It just helps me with my talk. Again, look at the crater rim and separate the base of the collapsed terraces and landslides from the outer rim scarps. The base of the collapsed material here has a perfectly circular shape, but the outer scarps clearly define a perfect symmetrical hexagon with 6 straight sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, separated by 120-degree internal angles. Next one, please. Even Plato, the quintessential flooded circular crater, has local scarp faces that are pretty straight on the left. Look at this one over here, and this one down there. Now, I'd never call Plato hexagonal or even polygonal. Rather, it seems to represent something intermediate, or if you like, hybrid, between the shapes of Tycho and Copernicus. Next one, please. Just so you don't think this is an optical illusion, here's 3 relatively small impact craters, pretty much face-on with no optical distortion due to foreshortening due to location, all of which show clear hexagonal morphology, especially Encke, which is even drawn hexagonal in Ruckel's famous lunar atlas. Next one, please. I want now to look at a set of 4 highly popular impact craters located in the lunar highlands near the middle of the visible lunar surface, so we can yet again observe them with a minimum of distortion. So you'll see here, here's Ptolemaeus, that's this one here. This is Alphonsus, and down here is Arzakel, and here, although I've misspelt it, oh no, I got it right in this version, Albategnius is this one here. Next one, please, Chris. Now here's Ptolemaeus. It's a very obvious flooded hexagon with those internal 120-degree angles in the style of Lacus Mortis. The lava within the crater has covered the collapse features of the crater rim and the lower parts of the outer rim scarps. Next one, please. Neighbouring Alphonsus, this time imaged actually by Wes Higgins, shows a similar overall form to Ptolemaeus. But I can only hold a ruler to 3 sides. I think I can justify that that's straight, and that is straight. The rest of it, I don't know. And I can therefore only really point to 2 clear-cut internal 120-degree angles. Next one. Albategnius is similar in form to Ptolemaeus, with a good hexagonal shape and internal 120-degree angles, despite having been heavily battered. Notice that the flooding of the crater here was less extreme than for Ptolemaeus, as is evidenced by the fact that the central peak is preserved, there, and the visible upper levels of the collapsed material. You can see the upper levels of the collapsed stuff here as well. Arzakel is the 4th member of this quartet of impact craters, here again shown in another Wes Higgins image. I want to draw your attention here to the very obvious scarps on the south side. Here, here, and here. And their absence on the well-illuminated east side. I don't see the scarps there, they're not there. I think they're also absent from the north and west sides, but the illumination isn't definitive in this image. Now, looking at just the south and east sides that I just pointed out, I'm struck by the angularity of the network of long, discrete scarps here on the south side. That's the angularity I'm pointing to there. Versus the smooth arc of the landslide material, both at the foot of the scarps and in the east where the scarps are absent. The scarps are big, whereas the fracturing within the landslide material occurred at a much smaller scale. And I think this key observation is going to provide the principal clue to understanding polygonal crater outlines. Next one, please. Using Copernicus as an illustration, this is how I think things might work. That scarps are major fractures in bedrock. They're in bedrock, not in loose, unconsolidated material. And just again, look, here are 3 scarps which are very obviously illuminated. Fracture mechanics in bedrock is very complicated, but it can be understood if you'll allow me to simplify, which I know you will. Let's look at the simplest crack possible. It could be any size, and it could be in your sealing plaster at home. So don't try to directly match this overly simplified diagram on the right to the complexities of Copernicus itself. The situation about midway along this crack is pretty simple. A tensile or pulling apart stress indicated in red acts to open the crack. As you might expect, once the strength, or if you like, the resistance to initial fracturing of the material, be it bedrock or be it plaster, is overcome, the opening of the crack tends to relieve or relax the driving stresses in that midsection of the crack. But the crack has a finite length. That's how I've drawn it. So by definition, the crack has ends, or tips more technically. And this is where life can get really complicated, and this is where I'm going to simplify things dramatically. Sigh of relief from the audience. The complication is this. The simple fact of a crack opening and propagating along its length to its tips induces new stresses at the tips themselves. This is in addition to the regional stresses that made the crack in the first place. As long as the crack stays simple, and that also means straight, the new stresses induced by the crack itself will help the crack grow longer and propagate. Just watch a fracture in your windshield as it starts with something small and then suddenly, woof, goes right across your windshield. But if the growing crack tip tries to bend, the different stress fields will be induced at the crack tips, which may make it harder for the crack to propagate and grow longer. My simple explanation here applies to tensional cracks, but the same general principles apply to sliding cracks as well, the ones that might be associated with those terraces sliding down into craters. Now, you've probably heard the old adage that states that Mother Nature is lazy. She always takes the path of least resistance. Well, in this case, the path of least resistance is to keep the crack straight. So in the case of a large-scale, orderly collapse of the crater rim by neat and tidy terraces, which might be tens to even maybe even 100 kilometers in length, we see them backed by long, straight scarps that they slid down. That's these things out here. Look at this mouse. That's these things here. They're the terraces, long terraces. And where they're well developed all around the crater, the resulting geometry of the outermost crater rim is therefore hexagonal. But in the case of a crater rim collapsed by messy landslides made of lots of short fractures, long straight scarps might have formed as collapse initiated, but there's no requirement for them to do so. So crater rims tend to remain circular in outline in that case. So when I say growing old polygonally, by old I mean immediately after the initial impact cavity formed and the crater walls started to collapse, which is really pretty young, if you get my point. So that's my hypothesis. Now, bearing the hypothesis in mind, let's take a look at some other examples of polygonal impact craters on the moon and basins. Next one, please, Chris. I'm sure many of you have seen Theophilus. It's a very nice circular crater. But take a look at its older neighbor, Cyrillus. It may be beaten to a pulp, but it's clearly defined by a hexagonal outer rim. Look at the straight sides here, here, and here. Next one, please. Here are well-known Aristoteles and Eudoxus with their smaller, more subtle neighbor, Egede. Egede is this one down here, by the way. Neither Aristoteles nor Eudoxus show signs of neat, orderly collapsed terraces. Both show evidence of messy landslide collapse. But both show well-illuminated western outer rims defined by straight scarps. This is particularly clear in Eudoxus. Look at that. And there's a straight segment there as well, with 120-degree internal angles. They're only partly polygonal, hybrid if you like. Egede, on the other hand, is flooded and defined by a crater rim that looks kind of like a cross or a mix between a circle and a polygon. And in this case, it looks rather like a distorted square with 4 sides. Next one, please, Chris. Here's Latron, a tilted flooded impact crater that you could easily dismiss as circular in outline, but it certainly has one, at least, straight segment to its outer rim. So I would identify this as a hybrid as well. Next one, please. Posidonius, which is this big crater here, is another great favorite among lunar observers, but take a good look at ghostly Shakonak on its southeast side. Here's, get this mouse to come to life, here's Shakonak. And Posidonius is indeed round, but Shakonak is clearly hexagonal in outline. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I think that's 6 across there. While we're here, take a look at Danielle crater up in the upper part of the slide. The illumination in this image clearly brings out 3 straight segments and the 2 internal angles of 120 degrees on its west side. Next one, please, Chris. Okay, hands up all those who've never observed Clavius through a telescope. And for the rest of you who have, now how many of you have spotted the 3 straight sides? 1, 2, 3. On the western part of the outer rim with the 120-degree internal angles. Next one, please. Which brings us back to Hercules, which we previously saw in the bottom right corner of the image of Lacus Mortis, which is where my whole story started. And its next door neighbor, Atlas. Although the southern parts of the crater rims in both cases certainly look circular in outline, the northern parts of both are well illuminated and clearly made of straight segments. Look at Atlas here. Look at that straight scarp. There's another one there and another one coming down there. And again, 1, 2, 3. With, of course, the 120-degree internal angles. Next one, please, Chris. Okay, even when the view is extremely foreshortened due to location of the crater close to the lunar horizon, or limb, we can still clearly see the hexagonal outer rims of numerous flooded craters, flooded again by basalt. Basalt which floods them such that their internal collapse features are hidden from view. This last point is going to be common to the next two images, so keep it in mind. Here we see the crater J. Herschel, that's this one here, which preserves a very nice hexagonal shape. Look, straight, 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 straight. And I think that's straight across the top there as well. And also note the very obviously hexagonal Pythagoras crater up in the northeastern corner, or northwestern corner there. Next one, please. Moving to the northeast lunar limb, notice the hexagonal crater Gardner. That's over here. Straight, straight. Little straight down there and straight across there. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that many of the least ambiguous hexagonal impact crater outlines are most evident when craters have been flooded by basalt lava, such that only their external rim margins are visible because, as proposed in my hypothetical model, that's where the long, straight, collapse-related scarps would be located, and they are what define the polygonal crater shapes. And the potentially circular noise represented by the collapsed terraces and landslides inside the crater have been filtered out by these flooded craters. Next one, please. Now, most of the craters I've discussed so far, perhaps with the exception of Egede, have been in the same kind of size range, somewhere in the 100 to a couple of hundred of kilometers diameter. So how does my hypothesis hold for impact features of other sizes? Well, here's Wallace, down here, in the southeast corner of the Imbrium impact basin. It's small, but it is resolvable in a backyard telescope. Just like Egede, it looks to me like a distorted square with 4 straight sides. They're sort of straight and curved, all right? So it's a cross. So here's my take-home message on this, or here's one of my take-home messages. Small impact craters only need 4 straight scarps in order to successfully collapse by long fracture propagation. Think of the meteor crater in Arizona, for example. It's square. Whereas larger impact craters require 6. Next one, please. So what do we find if we examine really large impact craters? Well, here's the tilted and flooded Sinus Iridum on the northwest side of the Imbrium impact basin. You've already seen this picture. What you didn't see was that it's one of the most observed features on the moon, but what I see here are 1, 2, 3, 4 straight segments. How many of you have recorded that in your observing notes? Let's go up in scale. Next one, please, Chris. Here's another favorite, the flooded Crisium impact basin. Tell me that's not bounded by 6 straight segments with internal 120-degree angles, and tell me that that is not a symmetrical hexagon. Next one, please. Moving to the really big impact basin scale, here in the southwest corner of the Mare Serenitatis, we see 2 admittedly relict straight segments. 1, 2, and that's down in this area here, with an internal 120-degree angle. Next one, please, Chris. So does that mean that all major impact basins are hexagonal in shape? Certainly not. This is pretty obvious from this satellite image of the enormous Mare Orientale basin. That's this thing here. It's a multi-ring basin, which we can only glimpse very rarely and very obliquely from Earth, which shows that its multiple collapse scarps are clearly circular in shape. Why? I think it's so large that the collapse scarps, if they're present, are so numerous that they merge visually into a pretty continuous circular geometry. So next one, please, Chris. And this is my last slide. So my take-home message tonight is this. When you next look at the impact features on the moon, take the time to see what you're actually looking at. In particular, make sure that you distinguish the inner collapse terraces and landslide materials from the outer crater rims. Or, where the craters or impact basins are flooded with lavas, be aware that you may be only observing the outer crater rim itself. Many impact features have remained circular in outline since their formation, but many, as I said, up to about 20% on the moon, have not. I find it interesting that many well-known lunar commentators, including Chuck Woods of the Lunar Picture of the Day fame, he's the guy that actually runs the website, do not highlight this aspect of impact crater evolution, even when it's readily apparent in the images that they're describing. So, see how many square, and especially hexagonal, and especially symmetrical hexagonal impact crater and basin shapes you can identify on the moon's surface through your telescope. As always, thanks for listening.
Folks, we're going to just do one question. Is there, if you could turn on the lights for 1 second. Okay, I'm going to go with, let's go with this gentleman here. You can speak up real loud.
Does angle and velocity of impact bear any challenge or any change to these features?
No, because unless you're looking at a really low angle of impact by the impactor that makes the crater, and I mean about 10 degrees, the mechanism for the formation of the initial hull is basically that the material goes up and out symmetrically, even if the thing comes in at 20 degrees, 25, 30 degrees. So the initial impact cavity is always circular in shape. The velocity would have no impact. But now that's almost a tautology. The velocity would not influence its shape, that's for sure.
Thanks, Simon. Simon is available after the meeting for questions as well. All right, some real quick announcements here, and maybe we can finish before 10:35. Earth Hour, a big conservation event. The museum, Science and Technology Museum, does a fine job with Earth Hour. If some of you that have been at previous Earth Hour events at the museum, I encourage you to come. It's just over 3 weeks from now on a Saturday. There's stargazing, a pretty large group. If you're interested and if you would like to volunteer, please contact Chris Tarrant there. Next slide, please. Also, over March break, including tomorrow, there is solar observing. It's typically right outside the front door. Obviously, check to see if it's cloudy before you come. But nonetheless, the museum offers a fine program. Next slide, please. I'd like to also say as well, and Bob, if you could stand up, wherever you are, Bob. Okay, terrific. So Pat Brown and colleagues run a astronomy course at the Mill of Kintail in Elmont. I've seen previous presentations. It's a very thorough, interactive course with lots of observation. Bob, sorry, one more time, stand up, please. If you're interested in that and want to know more details, it is free, donations accepted. Please contact Bob right there. Really nicely done. Next slide, please. If you want to watch this broadcast again, you can go to this URL, and another way of finding it is Google RASC, second word Ottawa, third word Ustream, okay, with a U in it, and you'll get to that link. And that will be posted just minutes after this broadcast. Next slide. Our library is open right after this. It's just right outside the doors. Take a sharp right. We have a book of the month, Stargazing for Dummies. Estelle's pick. Estelle, who runs the library for us. Next slide. After the meeting, a group of us, you're all welcome. Meet at the Kelsey's, just right at the top there for some continued discussion. Next slide. Tonight we had in the audience 185 plus 65 online. 65 online, and I want to say hello to my friend Scott Kilgore, who's in Oklahoma City, watching this. Hi, Scott. And thank you, everyone, for contributing to this. Excellent work. Next slide. Our next meeting is a month from now, the first Friday. It's April the 4th. Next slide. And the agenda is three presenters. You may remember John Wayne Ross. He's back. He was our presenter of the year last year. Remember all the enthusiasm that he brought to his presentation? Well, he's back again with an ancient view of comets. Bob Hillier is going to be sharing his trials and tribulations, Bob, of remote observing. Okay, he's got an observatory 7,500 kilometers from here, and he can observe from his home. And then Ken Whitnell, who I talked about previously, he has quite a solar telescope. He's going to give introduction to solar observing. So if you want to get started on this, he'll tell you, he'll give you that. And the next slide. Okay. I'm going to close the meeting now. We're going to have, I'm going to call out some door prize numbers here. Peter, if you can come up and help me with this. One thing I wanted to mention just before we shut down here is please don't run off. I mean, I would love to chat with you outside the meeting. Also, I've been informed that the observatory is open as well. I think there's some holes in the clouds, so maybe the moon will peek through, maybe Jupiter will peek through. But either way, it's worth, even if you can't see the sky, it's worth seeing the inside of the observatory. But don't run out and leave us behind here. Stick around, we'd love to chat. Okay, thank you. The meeting's closed, and we'll call out the door prizes here.
you.